Thank you very much. We're going to start. Is it? Yeah. The resources markup is going on right now for, I presume it's at Longwood. We're not there because it's pointless. We should be reauthorizing the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We're not doing that. And in fact, just a couple of hours ago, the chairman of the committee asked for a 3-page letter demanding of the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, 50 years worth of Land, Water, and Conservation Fund data from acreage, how much. So it appears that reauthorization is now taking a backseat to an investigation, 50 years investigation, and in doing so, further delaying the opportunity to reauthorize the fund in a very clean and bipartisan way. We're almost up to 200 people, members of Congress, that have signed on to that bipartisan bill, and with a great deal of support, 20 plus of our Republican colleagues have signed on to that bill. It is the companion bill to what's going on in the Senate. That seems to be moving there, and yet we're having a shutdown as to in this particular committee and in this Congress regarding the reauthorization of the bill. You know, since taking office, the House Republicans in the 114 have attempted to sell off public lands. We're going through that process, whether it was for drilling, mining, logging, sought to weaken the Antiquities Act, making it harder for future national parks and monuments to be proposed. Proposed more cuts into the budget that would further erode both the quality of our parks, forests, and other protected wildlands. And really at odds with what the American people are asking us to do with our special places. And for 50 years, this fund has been a vital tool in the conservation and protection of our national heritage. And this reinvestment money has been coming to us from federal oil and gas development. And despite all this, and despite almost 200 members of Congress, the public in general, and their support for the fund, we remain stalled and failing to reauthorize the LWCF. I think is going to continue to disrupt a very smart balance that we had, that the fund has sought to create across this nation. Every district has benefited from the fund. Every congressional district. Every state has benefited from the fund. And efforts to try to create a better situation for the interface between urban America and the public lands, they have been instrumental in helping to develop those kinds of park situations and to enhance visitation for urban America to our parks. Because of this shutdown, the last 7 days, the Republicans have created the shutdown with the fund and cost our parks up to this point in 7 days, $17 million. And until the fund is reauthorized, $2.5 million will be lost every day. I also want to mention that you know, we have communicated, you can see by the chart, with Chairman Bishop time and time again, asking, occasionally pleading, occasionally trying to embarrass the situation into bringing the fund up, reauthorizing it. It's non-controversial, bipartisan, and we get the response today to initiate an investigation into the fund. You know, the Montana Senator Day said, I personally don't think Bishop's view, don't think Bishop's view and others have said it necessarily reflects probably where most of the conference is now, the Republican conference, and where the people in our states are. And I hope that there comes a realization that this bill needs to be reauthorized. We will continue to press. We will continue to look at whatever happens down the road as possible vehicle in terms of the budget. And we will continue to try to make sure that we remind America, we remind our colleagues that every day that goes by, it is a net loss for our public lands and a net loss to the protection and development of those lands. I want to ask my colleagues in the committee that were kind enough to be here. I know it breaks their heart to skip one of the prohibition markups, but they're here. And by order of them coming into the room, let me begin by asking our colleague, Mr. Cartwright, for his comments. Sir? And then after that, Mr. Napolitano, Ms. Tsongas, Mr. Gallego, and Mr. Huffman.
How about a round of applause for our And I want to thank my friend, our ranking member, Mr. Grijalva, for setting up this event to discuss the importance of the Land and Water Conservation Fund and express our frustration with our colleagues across this aisle in the Natural Resources Committee for their failure to include reauthorization in this week's markup or to introduce reauthorizing legislation on their own. Republican refusal to make an effort to reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund flies in the face of the will of the American people who overwhelmingly support this program. I support the LWCF because of the significant ecological, social, and of course economic benefits the fund provides to my constituents in northeastern Pennsylvania and the people across the country. Since the fund's inception, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where I live, has been awarded $123 million to enhance our parks, our cultural treasures, our fish and wildlife refuges. These funds have helped outdoor recreation become a $21.5 billion industry in the United States, and it supports 219,000 Pennsylvania jobs. The fund is currently working with the National Park and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to expand the land holdings of the Cherry Valley National Wildlife Refuge in the Pocono Mountains in northeastern Pennsylvania. A beautiful place. If you get a chance to visit, do it. If successful, this effort would increase access to premier recreation, help drive economic growth in the surrounding communities, and secure a vital environmental treasure. When I came to Congress, I joined the House Natural Resources Committee because one of my highest priorities is protecting America's environment. I urge all of my colleagues to join with me in supporting the Land and Water Conservation Fund as a vehicle for preservation and wise stewardship of our nation's remaining natural assets. When I got to Congress, I found that there are a bunch of people that I refer to constantly as the shutdown crowd. And that's what this is, Ranking Member Grijalva. This is a shutdown, and yet another in a series of shutdowns. There's another one going on about the Ex-Im Bank. It seems like anything that's practical, that makes sense, that Americans in general want, this shutdown crowd, you know, somebody read a book by Ayn Rand, and all of a sudden any kind of government spending is immoral. And so they want to shut it down. Again and again we see this. It's wrong. It is against not only the will of the American people, but we think a majority of the United States Congress. And I often liken this shutdown crowd to the teenagers who leave your house. You know, there are those of us who are old enough to have kids leaving the house, and they lived in your house the whole time they were growing up, and then when they go off and they live someplace else, they find out they have to pay rent. And they're in a high state of outrage over that. How could they have to pay rent? As if you weren't paying rent or a mortgage the whole time they were living with you. That's how childish these people are. Don't make any mistake about it. The shutdown crowd are a bunch of irresponsible teenage kids. And this is a very fitting and proper gathering, Mr. Grijalva, to have to protest their machinations. So I conclude by specifically asking everyone to join me in supporting Ranking Member Grijalva's bill, H.R. 1814, which would permanently reauthorize this wonderful American treasure, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, for the benefit of present and all future generations. Thank you all so very much.
I don't know if I can follow that now, but being on natural resources for 17 years this year, I've seen antics that these people have done, and it just is not fathomed. My staff requested one of my recipients of a grant to let us know how it affected them, and they replied, Rio Vista along the Rio, oh shoot, I just deleted it. Say it again, please. It was a grant that benefit Native Americans and benefit the land use, and they are very grateful for that because it did help being able to see small print, Joe. Wait a minute. Yes, I can read it. I used to make you guys yes, along the railroad was made possible by the LWCF grant. It includes native plant restoration, stormwater capture elements, as well as extensive barrio history, outdoor interpretive area, exercise trail. Well-loved and meaningful Native American Tonga interpretive elements. Grateful for the visionary program park opened in 2008. Thank you so much. And so this is just one example of the benefits it's had, such as yours, Matt. I'm sure there's more. We just was able to get one back. But I'm concerned because anything that's good for people, anything that's a service, is not meaningful to my colleagues on the other side. And I think we need to get the message out to the voting public that we need to protect those areas that are so critical for our working class folks, for the people who have no parkland. As you well know, there is a certain amount of dedicated parkland that every city is supposed to have. No city in California meets that. And we have asked before to turn small spaces into small parkland. Well, how do we do that if we can't help fund it? We can't help bring that ability for our children to be able to experience open space and be able to see all the different areas that they can be taken advantage of. Now, this was funded in 1965, you're right, 50 years. And it expired, I guess it reauthorized in 87, and the expiration date, as you can see, was the end of last month. What's happening to that money that is going into that fund? Are they going to shift it into a general fund? Is it going somewhere else? We want to be sure that fund stays to be able to have those funds for new programs, which are not even yet being introduced. And then, of course, the new federal and state projects cannot start without that new dedicated funding. Playing games, you're right, they're kids. They're playing games. And I think eventually they're going to play themselves into a corner where hopefully the American public is going to recognize that they are not taking care of business. We are the people's house. It's a house of, U.S. House of Representatives, not U.S. House of Politicians. And so I think we need to be able to drive that point to their membership, to our friends. I've talked to Republicans and Democrats about what's going on in the House, and they can't believe it. I said, well, don't talk to me, talk to them. Because we can't seem to get them to change their mind. This is a perfect example. And then, of course, this would, if it's a permanent reauthorization instead of 25 years, even better. So what's the problem? Another study for how much money, for how long is this going to be set aside and again, played around with. So again, let's stop playing games. Let's get down to work. Thank you so very much, Raul. You're great, my friend. And yes,
Thank you. It's great to be here with so many people who care about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, and always to work with Mr. Grijalva, our very distinguished ranking member. As I was listening, I felt like I was reminded of a fairy tale, and that was that long ago and far away, something that never happens today happened 50 years ago, and actually Republicans and Democrats came together around a very simple idea, which was, as we use up one natural resources, to use the resulting profits to protect another. It was a novel and forward-thinking idea that balanced the demands of energy and the environment. For half a century, the fund has used revenues from the depletion of offshore oil and gas to preserve land and water resources, promote recreation, conserve open space and public lands, protect natural and historic sites, that which makes us unique as a country. And as such, it does not cost the American taxpayer a single dollar. We have to remember that this is funds taken from the use of one resource to put into the protection of another. And it actually drives money back into the local economy. For the over $3 billion in fund grants, that has led to $7 billion in non-federal matching grants. It's using the federal government as a strategic partner. Every fund dollar invested in public lands leads to $4 in economic benefit in local communities, and I think we all have examples of that. Certainly the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been invested in all of our communities. I have two examples. My district is home to the Minuteman National Historical Park, which protects the Revolutionary War history of this country and the shot heard around the world. And there was a farm where our Minutemen had stored their munitions. When the British heard that the munitions were stored there, it prompted their decision to march on Lexington and Concord, which led to Paul Revere's ride to warn that the British were coming. He got there in time so that the Minutemen could hide the munitions. When the British arrived, the munitions were not at Barrett's farm, which prompted the British to then move on to the shot heard around the world. This farm had been owned for 2 centuries by local farm owners. It had had 2 owners. It came on the market. A nonprofit bought it to protect it. Eventually, the park was brought within the boundaries of the national park, thanks to the work of Mr. Grijalva, when he was the chairman of federal lands. And then subsequently, Land and Water Conservation funds were given to the park to purchase the farm to protect it forever for American history. This is what this fund does. It also, as we know, creates open spaces. I also was present when money was awarded to put into a local playground that bordered a small lake. It was very important to a small community within my district. So we can all tell those stories of the important work that the fund has done. 80% of Americans recognize that it's valuable to them. They may not always know it by name, but when you point out what it does, they very much support it. I'm so grateful that 200 plus have signed on. Grateful that we've got 25 Republican members who have seen the light, but obviously much work needs to be done, and I urge my colleagues, both within our party and across, although I don't know if there's anybody left in our party who doesn't support it, to move ahead and make sure this fund continues to protect national American heritage, both environmental and historic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, this is my first year here in Congress, and I'm lucky to be serving under Ranking Member Ruben Gallego. It's scary to think that I am in a body that was more dysfunctional than the Arizona Republican-led State House, but I have found it. It is the U.S. Congressional-led GOP House, especially when with such a bipartisan, well put together program, one that is very well regarded, has been well regarded over time. In Arizona alone, we've received about $210 million in LWCF funding just in the past 4 decades. And you'll know some of these places, the Grand Canyon, one of the best attractions and economic driver in Arizona and Nevada, and of course the White National Park. Not only those attractions, but even my local community colleges have benefited. For example, ASU West, on the west side of Phoenix, received about $500,000 for their campus in 2004. But overall, we know this program works. We know it has bipartisan support. And we know that if given the opportunity and brought to the floor, that it would pass overwhelmingly. It is, again, the dysfunction of this Republican-led Congress, as well as, for some reason, a chairman that is more focused on witch hunts than productivity, that is really holding back this program. And I hope and I pray that we will get over that and keep moving forward. Thank you again for your leadership.
Thank you.
Member Raul M.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Congressman Huffman. I want to join my colleagues in thanking our ranking member, Mr. Grijalva, for his leadership on this very, very important issue. I could tell you about all the projects in my district that have benefited from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Kings Range, on the Lost Coast, and Redwood National Park, Point Reyes National Seashore, on and on. But the truth is, the story of those projects in my district is replicated all over the United States of America. This is a fund that for 50 years has been doing this kind of great work for conservation, for wildlife, for public places, and doing it in every county of every state in this country for 50 years on a bipartisan basis. I can't imagine too many things more successful than the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And the fact that we're standing here today demanding that it be reauthorized after it's been allowed to lapse is frankly quite shameful. The piece of it that makes it especially shameful is it doesn't cost the taxpayers anything. And this is important, and just something that I want to underscore, that the bargain 50 years ago, 50 plus years ago, was that we will make public leases available for folks to extract oil offshore, but they're going to put a little bit of the royalty revenue into this wonderful fund that will benefit wildlife, that will help us conserve land and water. And it worked for a long, long time, until the Republican Congress moved the goalpost, stopped honoring the deal, basically changed the bargain. Now, we haven't stopped offshore drilling. In fact, we're offshore drilling at an almost unprecedented rate. We are awash in oil in this country now, so much so that oil prices are at very low levels, and folks are asking that we lift the ban on oil exports, but we have so much oil that we don't know what to do with it. But the bargain is not being honored, because the money that has been going in to the Land and Water Conservation Fund has not been appropriated, and now, adding insult to injury, the fund itself has been allowed to lapse. So that is not okay. My colleague Matt Cartwright called the House Republicans the shutdown crowd, and frankly, when I see such an essential bargain like the Land and Water Conservation Fund changed and corrupted by their politics, I want to shut something down. I want to shut down offshore drilling until they honor the bargain that was made over 50 years ago for our environment, for our wildlife, and for our public places. Thank you, Mr. Grijalva, for your leadership.
I am the newest member of the Natural Resources Committee. I'm Lacy Clay from St. Louis, Missouri. And I'm here to show support for the ranking member, who is a strong advocate for the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as well as our environment throughout this country. Let me echo what my colleagues have said. Jared, you're absolutely right. This is a no-brainer for anyone who serves in Congress, unless you're a mental midget. There are a few of them around. But let me share with you also one example of, I think, the worthiness of this fund and the importance in preserving the history of this country, and that is, if it's not reauthorized, at the Gettysburg National Military Park in Pennsylvania, for example, the National Park Service is intending to protect an underground railroad site within the park's boundary. The National Park Service notes that the funds are urgently needed to complete the